So welcome back to the Wave Podcast, everyone. My name is Pluria. This is Connor sitting next to me. And today we have brought in Holly J. Mitchell from the 2nd District, and she is the lead of the County Board of Supervisors. So thank you for taking some time out of your day today to sit down and speak with us.
I appreciate that. I would not say I'm the lead. I was chair last year. This year, Janice Hahn is chair, but I'm one of 5. And I'm excited to be here to have this conversation with you both. Thank you for the invitation.
No problem.
We have a number of broad topics we'd like to get to, but we'd like to start with Karen Bass's major initiative, which is homelessness and housing in general.
Yes.
So overall, what is the board doing? What is their agenda this year to address homelessness?
So I appreciate you asking the question, because when I'm, in the market or in my front yard, I think the general sentiment is the government's not, quote, doing enough. And I think that's a reflection. If you don't see the encampment on your block or on your commute to work and school move, then you assume nothing's happening. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The city of LA and the county of LA passed Measure H and HHH. And I just got some statistics because I think it's really powerful. I wanted people to understand since the city and county passed those measures, tens of thousands of people have been housed in both affordable housing units where entire apartment complexes have been built, beds, either board and care or individual beds. Is it enough? No, we've got a lot more we have to build. Unfortunately, more people are losing their housing daily than we can house daily. It's
Right.
Literally, the numbers are like, we house 225 every day, every single day, and yet 212 lose their housing.
Yes.
So our strategy's got to be broad and diverse. The strategy has to be keeping people housed, which is the most humane and really the most cost effective. If we can figure out what's making their housing situation vulnerable, if it's affordability, whatever the case, keep those people housed as we continue to build to make space available for the rest of the folks looking for housing. LA County is 500,000 housing units short. So while we've built about 30,000 units, that is a drop in the bucket of what we need. And those units are not just for the unhoused, they're for everybody. It's housing that you too can afford as young professionals. It's housing that I may want to transition to as I continue to age, you know what I mean? And so we've got to build. We've got to build across the spectrum, shelters, short-term housing, transitional housing, affordable, moderate income. We have to build to keep up with the overall demand so people can afford it, and that we need to build the kinds of housing that meets the unique needs, that does have wraparound services for people who need that.
I like that you've characterized it as a supply and demand problem, because broadly the housing theory of everything is simply that people are losing their housing because housing is unavailable, it's expensive, it's rare,
Exactly.
and we need to create supplies to lessen demand.
Right.
What are some of the roadblocks that are getting in the way of building this housing, in your view?
Well, I think, they're historic. That none of this happened overnight. We didn't wake up one day and LA County have 70,000 to 80,000 unhoused. There are a variety of
Problems.
policies that were put in place, sheer economics, affordability, the fact that incomes haven't kept pace with inflation. So there are all kinds of reasons. But, some of the reasons, deal with what we build, for whom, and where, okay? What we build. I hear a lot from single-family homeowners in my community that don't want the look of their block to change, right? And so they don't want the community pushback on building more densely, building multifamily housing.
In walkable neighborhoods.
Precisely. So again, what we build, for whom? People stop me, Mitchell, what are you going to do about the unhoused? Or what are we all going to do? How are we all willing to make sure that our own blocks may look different?
A common criticism is
across
that
the board.
There's too many stakeholders in the decision pipeline when public money is involved with creating new housing blocks. That it's easier and faster to use private money to do so, especially with the builder's remedy, which is that 1990s clause that allows homeowners or builders to come in and bypass local zoning laws and
if they default on the promise to the governor.
review them.
Yeah.
Right.
How do you feel about that? Is that a solution at the statewide level for Los Angeles' housing problems?
I don't know that is the singular solution. I think that we've got to, first of all of us as individuals decide that we are no longer willing to live in a city, a county, and a civilized society that walks past people who are unhoused. We as residents of this county have to acknowledge that we are willing to do all that we can to house every resident, and that we have to have honest conversations with ourselves about who the unhoused are. I think that there are these broad assumptions. They're all mentally ill. Not true. They all are choosing to live on the street. Not true. There are people who go to work every day, who are living in their cars because they simply can't afford it. And so I think the housing strategy has to be as broad and diverse as the needs of the people who need housing. And so private need to step up and build. Nonprofit organizations need to be empowered with resources to step up and build. Government needs to be in the building business, and we have been in recent decades where historically government didn't build. Government's job was to get out of the way for private developers, but to also hold private developers accountable. To making sure that they are building what the community needs. It's not just about a purely for-profit endeavor. You look around at the construction that has happened, there's lots of unaffordable housing units that sit vacant. Those 3 towers that they built in my old favorite parking lot when I'd go see the Lakers at downtown, those 3 high-rise, and it's like, who lives there? Mm-hmm. The average rent on those units is astronomical. And so it's what we build, where we build it, and for who.
And it's really, as far as like the community input, because a lot of people, they think about homelessness and they go, well, the county's not doing enough, the city's not doing enough. But then when it actually comes down to it, they're the people that are rejecting these proposals in their community to, actually have these go forward.
And show up and the response is ugly and visceral.
Yeah.
And my response is the unhoused are our family, friends, and neighbors. I did a tour of a new apartment complex on the Crenshaw corridor that was built using containers. So I was like, I'm visual. I have to see, does it look like a boxcar? What does it look like when you get inside? They were quite small, some single, some 1-bedrooms. And I was in there thinking, oh my God, I couldn't turn around twice in here. I couldn't fit all my, just my junk I've accumulated 59 years on the planet. I had a couple of young staffers with me, and they were like, when are you going to open it up? When are the leases available? And it occurred to me that everyone has different housing needs. And so while my Baldwin Hills constituents who complained about that complex being built, oh, you didn't build parking, they're going to park in our neighborhoods, they're too small, who's going to live there? The place filled up instantly. It's on the metro line. And so there is a segment of the population who that kind of housing does work for. So I told my Baldwin Hills residents, because, you all stay in your lovely big houses that you have ascended to, there's another generation of people, young, older, those who want to downsize, who this works for. And so we've got to build differently for different kinds of people.
And would you say, working with, the state's agenda, because Gavin Newsom has allocated $12 billion for the next 2 years to, help house the homelessness population in throughout the state, has that helped you you and the board with making decisions and getting things through? Because I know that he withheld over $1 billion because he said it wasn't doing enough. Mm-hmm. So how is working with the state on this problem?
Well, I think it helps that I've spent a decade of my life there working as a state legislator, as chair of the Senate Budget Committee, have a great working relationship with the governor. And I have to say that LA County wasn't on the naughty list when he threatened holding that money back. He had a convening. I was there in the space, and we talked about what counties are doing. And every county and every municipality is really responding differently. I'm proud of what LA County and LA City, what we're doing now, what we did by passing those measures, what the voters did by passing those measures, saying we will tax ourselves to create this fund to build and to fund the wraparound services we believe the unhoused folks need. And so we have, for example, a wonderful pilot in my district called Safe Landing. It's very expensive, but it's critical because it's a no barrier entry system. An unhoused person can walk up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can bring your pet. If you're a couple, you can come together. There's a place where you can store your items. When you talk to the unhoused, I think historically the model that we've built doesn't meet their needs. Not allowing pets, having strict requirements. If you're a couple, you couldn't stay together. If you were a homeless family, once your son reaches the age of 13, he couldn't stay in the family unit. He has to go in the single adult male unit. I'm a mother. I wouldn't send my son over there by himself. So government has had to respond to the new unhoused population. It's no longer the World War II or Vietnam vets who are the unhoused. We have unhoused families, people who are in couples, people who want to bring their pets. And so we've had to build and be creative and respond to the new emerging needs of the unhoused. So we do have a place where they feel comfortable coming in off the street.
I like that you characterized the unhoused as us and the housing insecure as everyone. This
Absolutely.
is a community problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice segue into the other thing we wanted to talk about, which was the criminal justice reforms. Just for starters, I was wondering if you could explain where we're at in the process of closing the men's central jail.
Let me take a step back, if you don't mind.
I know that's a little bit of
It's big. But let me just take a step back and acknowledge my own history as a legislator for 10 years in carrying some of the most progressive, innovative package of legislation that really helped to redefine criminal justice reform. I think when we use that term, everyone has a different idea of what that means. And from my perspective, we are right-sizing the criminal justice system. The pendulum swung too far in one direction, where we began to criminalize things like substance use disorder and poverty and the unhoused. Those are not actions that I believe should be criminalized. We also are in a place now where we've, legalized marijuana. And so how do we now untie those knots that we've tied for so many years, where people are serving time for possession of a substance that's now legal to possess? So we really have to go back through the penal code and look at it through a different lens. We also have to acknowledge that it had a disproportionate impact on Black and brown people and poor people, quite frankly. And with that new lens and acknowledgement, with the new acknowledgement that addiction is a public health issue. During the crack epidemic, it wasn't perceived that way. People were sentenced to excessive sentencing. The difference in sentencing between powder and crack cocaine was offensive. I was proud to carry that bill in the state legislature to create parity. If it's the same amount, then why were you sentenced for longer because it was in the form of crack versus powder? And that broke out based on racial and socioeconomic lines, quite frankly. So a part of what we're doing is bringing a new lens to right-sizing the criminal justice system, acknowledging that the laws on the books have disproportionately impacted Black and brown and poor people whose communities are over-policed, and how we holistically acknowledge how we got here.
I'm
Lack
with you
of
on
jobs,
that. Yeah.
lack of housing, all those kinds of things. So Men's Central Jail is a antiquated, falling apart, horrific place for the people who are sentenced there, for the men and women who work there in the sheriff's department. And as you know, a couple of years ago, the board made the decision to close it. The question is how, and how do we do it right and well? Where do we divert people who are already sentenced? How do we create the program that the county did, Alternatives to Incarceration, to acknowledge the upstream issues that lead people to being locked up? Far too many for reasons that don't justify going to jail. The number of people that are in jail pre-trial just because they don't have the resources to bail out.
Almost half the
Half
population.
the population.
Yeah.
The number of people who are serving in Men's Central Jail who are suffering from severe mental illness. Why? Because when we see someone having a mental health crisis on the street, what do? We call 911. Who shows up? The police. Where do they take them? To jail. As opposed to having other systems in place to deal with the needs of the severely mentally ill. So the board This past Tuesday, I've got a motion coming up, 1st of May, to create beds, to fund and build community-based beds to deal with what we call the P3, P4 population, those suffering severe mental illness who are in county jail, as well as unlocked bed facilities through our Office of Diversion and Reentry, ODR, which are community-based settings that have had amazing success, 90% success rate. The recidivism rate is lower than any other carceral system. So what we've got to do is fund these alternatives, stand them up in the community so we have a place for people to go and to be instead of Men's Central Jail.
And that's what you're doing beforehand, correct? So, because I think a lot of people, especially from the outside looking in, like even my question was like, well, are they just going to close the jail and just let everybody out? Or is like there going to be programs in place? Because that was my biggest concern, is that there are all these different areas that need to be addressed. We had, No Justice LA. We had someone come in and talk to them recently. We were talking about this, and it's a big concern because, especially what you see on the news, they're like, well, they're going to close the jail and everybody's going to be on the streets and we don't know where they're going to go. So I'm glad that, you're speaking to that, because people at home need to know, like, okay, well, we're not just closing the jail. We're lifting up
alternatives.
Yeah, creating alternatives that actually work, that we've seen work, rather than just like, oh, they're going out on the streets.
And we also have to educate the public about who's in jail and why. And so when we talk about, when the former sheriff said, like 2 sheriffs ago, LA County Men's Central Jail is the largest mental health facility in the country, that should say something to people.
Yes.
And those 9x9 cells are no place for someone suffering from severe mental illness.
It's not even the cells, it's just the waiting areas where they put the overflow.
All of that. It's no place for someone to either attempt to get healthy, even to be treated humanely. And so, sometimes people really grapple with, well, they committed a crime, so. And so we really have to, I think, do a better job of educating ourselves of who's there. Will we always need to have a place for people to serve time for having committed criminal acts?
Yes.
Yes. Are the vast majority of the people who are currently in Men's Central Jail fit that category? No.
A lot of people ask, like, oh, what about the victims? But in a lot of these cases, the offender is the victim, and that's who needs to be addressed. So you have these programs like Safe Landing and community beds that are trying to rectify that. You also wanted to talk, and that answers one of your questions. You wanted to talk about what we're doing for mental health, and you also wanted to talk about what we're doing for, personal public safety. I don't know how to term this.
Yeah, so essentially my whole thing is, with public safety, like where do you draw the line on because people want to have the right to defend themselves. Like the Second Amendment is a big thing for, in the Black community and a lot of other communities. So I was just kind of curious, like where you fall along the lines of like personal defense, because again, if we're going to take money away from, the sheriff's department, the police departments, and, we're kind of trying these new things, where do we allow people to, like, for example, concealed carry is now a big thing. Like how do you view that aspect of things? Because I think, again, the public's view of concealed carry is, oh, they just get a gun and they get to carry it and just do whatever. But it's like, no, there's a process. They have to get, evaluated. They have to go in and get interviewed, mental health checks, background checks, firearms training, all kinds of things. So I'm just curious, like, where you are on the spectrum of,
what kinds of gun control initiatives are you for and against here?
So as a member of the legislature, California was very progressive, going way back decades to former Senator Roberti. In terms of California was one of the first states to really, ban, the kinds of firearms that I don't believe an average citizen needs in their home to protect themselves.
So there were
with magazines that allow you to fire, multiple rounds in seconds.
And unsafe guns, Saturday night specials?
All those kinds of things. And then this new ghost gun scenario where you can order via Amazon parts and assemble a gun that has no serial number,
and
that
3D
can't be tracked, and 3D printers. All of that to me is beyond dangerous. And while I appreciate the perspective of individuals wanting to, for whatever reason, have firearms, if they are willing to go through all of the steps that you talked about, I have a concern when we have law enforcement who kind of open up the gates for concealed carry, and anyone can kind of go in for any reason to be able to walk around in public and carry a firearm legally. I have a problem with that. You know, when the Constitution was written, that was before, and they talked about a citizen militia. That was before we had an LAPD and a sheriff and a highway patrol. We, as residents of this county and state, pay tax dollars to fund. We have professionals who are trained, who take an oath to protect and serve. My hope is that they protect and serve equally and unbiased. And I do have a concern when, you know, my neighbors take it upon themselves with minimal training, whatever the case may be, to think that they are, quote, protecting their property themselves by having a firearm. You know, when we look at the statistics and realize the incidents of harm, unintentional, caused in homes, either accidental shootings, domestic violence, there's a gun in the house, it gets heated, there's a firearm, it gets brandished. Those statistics trouble me. And I don't know that there's a way that we can ever compare, you know, how many crimes were averted because a private citizen had a gun, as opposed to how many lives were lost because a private citizen had a gun. When you look at these young people protesting in Tennessee right now, and those heart-wrenching pleas of parents who are saying, I taught in school, we would not be more safe to allow teachers to have weapons. That's not the case. We need to limit access. I think this is an important conversation that we need to continue to have as a country. And it's unfortunate that it's with the painful backdrop of weekly, daily loss of life as a result of gun violence.
I totally understand that. I just feel like, you know, my view on the Second Amendment is I feel like most people focus on the bads, and then they say, well, that's all gun owners, when it's like, no, because there's like hundreds of millions of gun owners in this country that, you know, law-abiding citizens, you know, carry their firearms and use them properly. I think that, you know, mass shootings are terrible, and I think that we really need to address, you know, mental health within our communities. I'm just more on the side of, like, you know, like the history with black people and like where we came from and like how far it took us to get here. And, you know, especially when you talk about, you know, defunding the police and, you know, how police are reacting to, you know, people of color and communities. I'm just more on the side of like, I should be able to defend myself with a firearm with like whatever it may be. So that's why I posed that question, because, you know, a lot of people, again, they look at the overall argument and they don't know enough about the issue, and they just go, oh, we need to ban everything, you know.
You know, I think the reality is there is no black and white in public policy. It is all nuanced. As we talked about who's in Men's Central Jail, as we talk about who our unhoused family, friends, and neighbors are, as we talk about gun ownership, it's all nuanced. And so I have and will always vote for bills that limit magazine size, you know, the ability to assemble assault rifles. I don't know of a private gun owner in an urban setting that would need an assault rifle, that with a magazine that would allow them to load one time and have 100 rounds in a gun. I can't see a scenario where that's necessary.
I totally understand that, but then the conservative argument to counter that would be more of on the side of, well, if the criminals aren't going to follow the law anyway, shouldn't I be able to have something that the criminal would have? Like, what would you say to people like that are saying, you know, well, they're going to print guns, they're going to steal guns, they're going to do all kinds of illegal things with guns. Well, why do I have to be the one to not like have this law put against me? Like, what are we doing to the criminals? Like, are you for legislation that's like more sentencing or more modifiers on criminals that are using firearms, or is it more?
I am for legislation that limits access to all of those kinds of firearms we've talked about. And so that limits access even for those who tend to use them to engage in criminal activity. To have firearms with no serial weapon. I think we should have the right to what you have to go through to get a driver's license in the state of California in terms of, you know, proving that you know the laws. We should require that of anyone who wants to possess a gun. We should, through, you know, gun shows and be able to impose that. You should be able to drive across a state line to Nevada, buy firearms, and circumvent laws in the state that you live in. And so I firmly believe that we should limit access and really get to the core of the issue around and fundamentally understanding gun violence. I think it's also a myopic view to look at it just from this perspective of I'm an upright citizen and I should have the right to protect myself. We should talk about, from a much more organic perspective, the impact gun violence has had on our community broadly.
And in the same way that you talked about how the unhoused, the housing insecure are us, we are all this community. In the same way, we are the people, both the criminals and the non-criminals using guns. You don't know who is going to commit a crime with a gun. You could even be yourself before the fact. So when you limit access to guns, necessarily you have to limit access to guns to everybody.
Across the board.
I somewhat understand that. I just view it more as like the majority, like the overwhelming majority of guns used in firearms are like stolen, printed, they're illegal. So that's why, like, for me, it's kind of hard wrapping my head around that, because I'm like, well, if they're already doing it illegally, like, in your mind, how are you combating the criminal by, like, making the bans against law-abiding citizens? How does it
Well, frankly,
down?
most of the bans are against the kind of guns you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the bans are against that. I mean, yeah, there are limits in terms of who can have a concealed carry.
Well,
but most of the work we're talking about are on the ghost guns, are on the automatic and semi-automatic weapons. Most of, and this is outside of the county realm, so this is really federal and state, to be perfectly honest, but most of the legislation that comes through is dealing with limiting access to the kinds of guns that tend to find their way into the black market. That's where the vast majority of the policy is.
Okay, and then you're with the board. Have you guys tried anything to limit? Because again, the majority of gun deaths in America are suicides, and it goes back to mental health. How are you guys combating, that issue? Because it is like one of the biggest issues in America.
It absolutely is. And then again, it's access and availability. And so the LA County Department of Public Health has a gun violence prevention unit that works collaboratively with community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and the Department of Mental Health to really come up with creative interventions in the context of public health. And so that department's been in existence for several years, and it's had any number of initiatives to really look at it at a county level.
And would you say that, again, it goes back to what we've been coming back to over and over again, is it's really about public awareness? Because I think if more people knew, you could like actually report someone to get them declared mentally defective if they were having a psychotic break, or if they were having mental problems or thinking about suicide. I feel like, again, it's just one of those things, like, people don't know there are systems in place to help prevent some of these things that happen.
I agree.
So
and it's we talk about the one kind of interesting silver lining, I think, as a result of COVID is the acknowledgement that we all suffered through that experience, and an acknowledgement around mental health and a willingness to talk about it more publicly. When you think about the number of athletes, and on the CBS show this morning, I'm going to say his name wrong, a rapper from Seattle, Macklemore, talking about his own substance abuse, relapse, and mental health challenges. I think it's coming to the forefront, and people are asking for help. And the county is stepping up in ways that we never have historically in terms of expanding access to mental health services. We have a brand new, beautiful mental health clinic right in the heart of Koreatown. We're doing remote access to mental health services. I did a contract with a nonprofit organization where it's remote mental health services. It is literally a van that is parked on various corners throughout South LA, where people can come there. There's a video monitor, and either schedule an appointment for in-person services or have a telehealth experience with a LA County mental health practitioner. We are trying to take services outside of bricks and mortar into the community to support people in navigating their struggles.
We've been circling around a wider and more nebulous topic through all of this so far, and that is that of systemic racism and the ways in which the dominant ideology have harmed the lower classes. So you've talked about housing, mental health services, limiting access to guns, and closing down mass incarceration sites. What are we doing at the community level to increase awareness and increase community ties and class consciousness?
So, I am a black woman in America who happens to have the privilege of serving in a leadership capacity. But that
You have
doesn't negate.
Karen Bass and an entirely female board of supervisors.
We do. And, I'm also a mother of a black son. And so what happens in the greater society impacts me like it impacts anybody else. And so in my team, I was elected to the board in 2020, pivotal year for all of us. And, we too are experiencing and witnessing this national debate or non-debate, quite frankly. And decided that we wanted to create a space for the constituents of the 2nd District and for county, the people, there are 112,000 people who work in county government, who work in the Sheriff's Department, Department of Mental Health, Public Health, who provide these critical life-sustaining services for county residents. And I wanted the department heads to also be a part of this conversation. The people who I have the privilege of appointing to the hundreds of commissions and advisory task forces to come together and have a safe space to talk about race. It's not enough to say, well, Holly, I'm not a racist. If I had a nickel for every well-meaning colleague that said that to me, I'd be a wealthy woman. It's not enough. How do we move through our community as active anti-racists? How do we unlearn our own implicit bias that we carry? And we all have it, black, white, or whatever. We all carry bias. How do we unpack that? And how do we learn strategies to do better and be better? How do we learn how to be allies? What does allyship look like? And so we decided that we needed to investigate that and create safe spaces to have the conversation. To simply look at a governor of a southern state who inappropriately mischaracterizes a curriculum and says it's harmful. Well, how do we create safe spaces to have real conversations about race where we can learn about each other, ask questions, and be better informed? So we made it up, this idea of the Racial Justice Learning Exchange, RJLE. We were also clear that this isn't like a lecture, one and done. You come and you hear Supervisor Mitchell tell you how to not be racist. No, we have to unpack this. And so since February of last year, we have had monthly gatherings, some large, some small, where we've viewed films and had discussion, where we've had walking tours of community. We walked through my neighborhood of Lamert Park, Crenshaw, to learn the rich history of the Japanese and African American communities who've come together for decades and lived, together, and how they honor and cherish each other's culture. We've had some lectures. We've had panels. We co-hosted with the Jewish Federation just this week a community Seder. It's Passover, to talk about the correlation between anti-Semitism and anti-Blackness. We had a conversation about white fragility in the county library in Manhattan Beach, where we talked about examples of when you've witnessed or practiced white fragility. And we talked about examples of when you've witnessed or practiced allyship. We did a training on how to be we did bystander training around the Asian hate and the increase in Asian hate we've experienced in LA County. And and we have all witnessed some form of hate directed either at a member of our own group or another. And what do you do in that minute? We all kind of get uncomfortable. Do we speak up? Do we provide cover? And so we actually had a training for people to understand the ways in which you can engage and be present and address a act of hate in real time. So I'm very excited about the work we've done with the Racial Justice Learning Exchange. Again, it's monthly. You can find it on the website. We move it intentionally around the 2nd District. So we are trying to hit every community and address issues that far too often go unspoken and unaddressed.
I have a specifically worded question, because this is fascinating to me, and I'm sure you have an opinion.
All right.
why do you think that why do you think that critical race theory, quote unquote, has been viewed as a threat, that it resonates as a threat with suburban white parents who listen to Fox News and are concerned about parental rights in schools?
Because it has been completely mischaracterized.
Right.
Kimberly Crenshaw created the concept based on a college-level curriculum, and what it is American history. And this notion, and this fear-based notion that, which is based in white fragility, quite frankly, that their children shouldn't be saddled with the responsibility of the actions of their foremothers and forefathers. Well, that's what history is. History is understanding how we got to where we are, how we got to these differences in our society. It's important for people to understand American history in its complexity and in its entirety. So to sanitize history, which some cultures have done in the past, have really led to bad things. I think Hitler's goal was to sanitize history and was to eliminate a group of people to create this purer race. We all know now, looking in the rearview mirror, that he was, mad. And I believe that when we look back at this period in history, we'll have a similar kind of visceral response. It is a complete mischaracterization of what the curriculum is, and it's fear-mongering.
I would definitely agree because we've had conversations about this numerous times, and I think it's that there's always, there's an extreme version of people that take it too far, where they're like, you are this, you are that, you're the reason this. And I think that, of course, Fox News is going to jump on and be like, well, look what they're saying to these kids. And then they use that extreme example for everything. When it's like, that's not like what critical race theory is. I think that, the country needs to come together as a whole and establish like actual curriculum, like how it's supposed to be taught, rather than just like, hey, everybody can do whatever they want and figure it out. Because, like there's other states that are trying to take slavery out of the history books and stuff like that. And it's like, you can't do that. Like you have to understand the past so that way the future does not repeat itself.
When you, at our Seder the other night, one of the core tenets of Passover is to celebrate the freedom of a formerly enslaved group of people. Kind of the focus of Passover. And it's also to teach history so we don't repeat those same mistakes. When we listen to our Armenian brothers and sisters whose own genocide is denied by far too many, whole countries are denying, and this is recent history.
Yeah.
So this denial of race, culture, religious-based bad behavior is rooted in ignorance.
Why do you think there's been a recent resurgence of interest in targeting minority populations like the LGBTQ community and the Black community in parts in recent years?
I think, when this country elected Barack Obama, far too many people assumed that act meant that we were in a post-racial society, and we are not, as exhibited, in my humble opinion, by the election of Donald Trump to be president. And the fact that his rhetoric, his philosophy helped
exacerbate the problem. And
it was always there, but it gave it air. And
it
gave
freed
them
the
freedom.
id.
It gave them freedom. Along with, economics. They're afraid. They're afraid that they're losing ground. They're afraid, when he promised folks that, we're going to go back mining, you'll have your jobs back. We all knew that was a lie. That is a technology that we will never return to. And I think people are desperate to hold on to their dream of fairness and equality for them. And if they have to step on somebody else to get it, then they're okay with that. And so to be reminded of the white supremacist ideology upon which this country was founded upon, people don't want to be reminded about that history. They want to put what was so long ago. No, it wasn't. Black people of today are 2-3 generations away from enslavement. And let's talk about what the lack of my foremothers' ability to pass on multi-generational wealth has done in terms of limiting my capacity in terms of home ownership. Redlining in this very liberal city of Los Angeles is very recent history. My mother, as a USC graduate in the 50s, couldn't rent an apartment in the jungle. I'm, a product of Lamert Park because that was about as far west as she could go to rent an apartment with a degree from the University of Southern California. When we look at what happened to our community with the expansion of the Santa Monica Freeway that cut right through the black wealth in terms of land ownership in LA, when Sugar Hill was cut in half. When we look into the Santa Monica Freeway and the black homeowners in Santa Monica who lost their homes. And so they want to say it's history, slavery was so long ago. Well, let's look at the role slavery and Reconstruction, and then Jim Crow, and the mass, prison industrial complex, and the criminalization of poverty, and the war on drugs, and who paid the price. How all that, over time, has continued to keep the foot on the neck of the black community. And I think the fact that we are resilient people and continue to survive breeds a different kind of maybe fear and resentment.
And what was your response to, the racism from it was the Los Angeles City Council?
Yes.
Like, what was your response to that? Because, again, I think a lot of people, too, they were just like, they're not even white. Like, they're being racist to, a lot of people were surprised about that as well. So what would you say your response to that was, and, like, how you think, government should, enact,
LA still seems to be trapped by a pluralistic understanding of politics, racial politics.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. My response to that is, and it came up through one of our discussions at RGLE, I'm proud to say, is that, you don't have to be white to subscribe to a white supremacist theory or ideology. And so what we saw was a group of people, all of whom I knew, 2 of whom I served with in the California legislature, who were talking about, quite frankly, individual power. I think that we coded those conversations by race, mm-hmm. but in reality, they were fighting for individual power. They attempted to frame it as we're fighting for the Latino community, and yet they then said very horrible comments about segments of the Latino community. So it was really about individual power and how that layers on top of racial politics in LA. The black and brown unity I have always experienced in my community in South LA, we weren't surprised by those comments, but nor will we be defined by those comments. I have said from the very beginning, that was a group of 4 people in a room who were fighting for their own survival.
It reminded me of the New York political scene in the 1890s. It was the Irish versus the Italians, and the politicians were using their constituents as, herds to fight the other constituents. And
right.
That doesn't seem to be very conducive to polite society.
I agree. And again, in that, when you really listen, if you listen to the full tape, not just the highlights, it was about how do I maintain power? How do I get reelected? How do I maintain power? And so that's a different kind of conversation.
You were on a podcast called She Shares a while back. Do you remember that? I can't remember the host's name, but she said that she was a conservative Republican, but that you had convinced her of many of the things that she thought she'd never accept. Progressive politics and reforms and change. What do you think you've said to people that have convinced them? Like,
well,
what
first
is,
of all,
what is it about
Holly,
your demeanor?
Get it, Holly. I think my theory that, when I first ran for office, my son, who is now 22, was 8, and I talked to him about, my decision and why. And so we were doing, he's a very, curious young kid and was asking questions. And so he said, it's going to be hard. I said, yep. And somehow he understood that there were no kind of black and white right or wrong answers when it comes to public policy. And I'm like, it's right. Most of it is in the gray matter. It's in the middle. And so I think by acknowledging that and working hard to dig deep, to really come up with solutions that are fair and equitable, and speaking my truth. Holding people accountable. No, I had a debate with the former sheriff who, had a very, who had a very kind of, from my perspective, sophomoric view of the unhoused, and that they should just be, and that they're all from someplace else. I'm like, no, they're not. I walk and talk to people in my community, and they're from the neighborhood, quite frankly, where they've pitched the tent. Because that's where I would go, in a community that I would know. So this notion that they're all from other states and they're coming here because of the largesse of our social service delivery system is simply not true. So I've worked hard to dispel myths. You don't have the luxury of walking around based on with an assumption based on nothing. I told him in that conversation, give me your citations. Show me the studies that conclude that the vast majority of the unsheltered, unhoused in LA City are from Kansas or Utah. And they've come in here because of our social service delivery system. Show me. Well, you can't. Well, I can show you studies that contradict that. So I not only bring my own ordinary life experience, I look at data. A policy should be driven based on fact. We talk about Men's Central Jail. Who is there and why? I think people tend to view public policy from their own very narrow lens. Oh, you're not doing enough about homelessness because the mentally ill lady who strips down and is naked on my corner is still there. Well, let me share some data with you about the number of units we have built, the kind of mental health services we are standing up. You just say defund the police. You're anti-police. No, I'm not. We've dumped on the backs and the laps of police more than they signed up for. I want to right-size law enforcement. I want to have an alternative for people to call when they see someone having a mental health episode, that you can call another number to have a mental health expert show up, not law enforcement who's not trained to manage that scenario. So I think when people hear the facts that I may be privy to because I am a policymaker, I do go deep, I understand, I monitor the budgets, I understand how we're spending the money and on what. I think maybe I have the opportunity to inform and educate. Change minds, that's optimistic, but I at least want people to leave a conversation or a podcast experience with me having a little more information than they had about what's really happening in their community, the role their government is playing on their behalf every day, even when they don't know it.
And so I had one more quick question before we finish everything up. How's your experience working with the new sheriff? And, is he on board with like initiatives of like, hey, like we're giving you all this money for mental health. Why don't we just take that away and actually put it towards mental health? Is he on board with you there, or are you seeing the same pushback from the former sheriff?
I endorsed Sheriff Luna after a very lengthy conversation with not only myself, members of my team who lived in Long Beach and lived under him as police chief for Long Beach and had questions in terms of his practice and policies in that capacity. And so we've had really great conversations. And, for me, budgets are value statements. How policymakers and how government prioritizes how we spend your money is a reflection of what we prioritize, I think, as a civil society. And, my conversations with the previous sheriff, he wasn't a good manager of his department or the budget. And so, constant cost overruns, not managing overtime, those are separate from our politics. We need a good manager. He is a department head. Yes, he's a top cop, but he's also a department head who has to manage the budget, hire people, manage overtime, all those kinds of decisions, making sure that there's appropriate coverage countywide, not going outside of your jurisdiction to Venice Beach when you have areas in the county that you are responsible for who haven't seen a sheriff when they need one. So my conversations with Sheriff Luna have quelled my concern about someone who has the capacity to manage the department well and right. I really invite people to be engaged civically. It's not enough to just, vote. Although in this special election here in the city of LA, that was this week, we saw, single-digit percentage turnout.
Yeah.
But to really engage, we have websites. We are, broadcast live, the board meeting. When you recognize there are 5 members of the LA County Board of Supervisors, 5 women. Each of us have 2 million residents in our district. I'm making decisions, every Tuesday that probably have more direct impact on the life of a LA County resident, quite frankly, than the president. And so people should tune in. I am coming from the state legislature to local government. I was, kind of taken aback about who shows up weekly to participate. And there are gadflies who come, take up time from members of the public who have viable information to share, who are there for, I'm not sure why they're there. We've got one guy who dresses up like Batman and he makes goat sounds. We have one who waves the Confederate flag and, calls us names and it's like a performance. And I'm fine. Everybody has their First Amendment right. But I have constituents who need to understand the importance of the decisions I'm making. We have budget decisions. LA County has a $44 billion budget. And I want people to show up and understand what's at risk for them and their children and their community. And not let folks who are there for the theatrics to take up all the time and space. There was a young woman who came to testify. I asked my staff, could get her phone number. They were like, why? And they told her I was going to call her. She was like, why? I said, I just wanted to call you and thank you. You were eloquent. You represented a perspective that needed to be in the room that day. And I'm sorry that you were surrounded by people who don't appear to take this seriously.
Would you say that the reason that is simply because, one, awareness, like we've been talking about this whole podcast, and then on top of that, people have like we talked about this with Just LA, that it's during the work week and people don't really have time, and then there are all kinds of different conflicting things.
And it's a complicated process. They need guidance from community organizations like Justice LA.
Exactly. So my one question is, I'm just throwing this out there. Why are we getting to, especially with voting, where people can, there's more voting on the weekends, it's more like a holiday. Why haven't we seen that from government? Because I know for a fact, I have so many friends that are like, oh, I want to vote, but I get off work late and, oh, I forgot. Or where can we, go to get that initiative pushed
Where can
forward?
we make some systemic improvements?
Well, I have to say, here in California, we did that. Another kind of strange silver lining with COVID, where everybody got the ballot in the mail. Mm-hmm. So you could vote at your leisure, at your kitchen table, and take days and weeks to get it done. We have, it's a voting season now. It's not just election day. We've got, early voting in LA County. We have those bright colored blue and yellow boxes that look like mailboxes where you can drop your ballot weeks before the actual, election day is like the cutoff. That should be viewed as the end of the election season. But we now in LA County have weeks leading up to the final cutoff day. So people need to understand that. People just need to make the decision that it's something that they're committed to do. We now have, online access to information where you can read about candidates. Because when I ran for this office in 2020, I was in the March 2020 primary. It was in the middle of COVID. There were more online Zoom debates than you could ever imagine. If somebody put forth the minimal effort, they could, even after the fact, on YouTube, see a debate between all the candidates and hear our perspectives and understand who we are. So I think people have to put forth the effort. Put together groups. There was a group of young black women in Sacramento when I was there who started a voter's guide. Just young women in the community who kind of divided up the work and shared their opinions about, what they learned. And people would lob on to the voting guide. And so I think we have to not give our power away. You can tell I get a little
It's understandable.
PO'd about this notion that, oh, it's so hard, I have to work. But you're giving your power away. You are allowing other people to make decisions for you on who gets elected. And those people make decisions that impact every aspect of your life, from gun ownership to resource allocation for housing to the list is
It's immense.
it's immense. And so judges, I get it, it's hard, but judges make decisions on whether someone goes to jail for life, walks, death penalty. Why would we not want to be engaged to figure out who those people are we are empowering to put on the black robe and make life and death decisions, perhaps about us or our family members? So that's the beauty of a democracy, and why I feel about it so passionately, separate from the fact that I'm an elected official, but it's also what attracted me to consider to be becoming one when I looked at elected bodies and saw so few people not only looked like me, came from my background, my neighborhood, my perspective. I am a single parent. As I said, I'm a middle-aged black woman in America with dreadlocks and tattoos. And so I bring my ordinary life experience to the policymaking process, and we want a diverse group of people to bring a diverse set of views and perspectives to establish the laws and regulations that govern us.
And it really should be. People really need to get off social media. Like, if you can take hours out of your day to, go on social media and rant and complain about things, it's like you should really take the time to, vote and,
And
research.
not just vote, but go to events like the Racial Justice Learning Initiative and get in touch with the community and involved with local government.
I bet
Exactly.
more people can name all the Kardashian girls as opposed to name the 5 women who serve on the LA County Board of Supervisors, arguably the most powerful elected body in the country. Just saying.
I'm so glad we had you here. I love to hear your passion, and you had a lot of good points. I hope the listeners take away from this some passion of their own that they can bring to their local government. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.